if you have tried meditation and it hasn't worked for you before, or it just felt like you couldn't turn your mind off and you kind of gave up and thought meditation's for someone else, that's not for me, I know the reason why, and I know what will change your meditation practice forever. Hello, my friends. Welcome to It's All Magic. I am your guide, your host, and your friend, Devin Hine. And here we'll be discussing how to make your life truly feel like magic. I believe that our very existence on Earth is nothing less than a miracle, and that we all have so much potential to learn, to grow, to experience, and to create during our short time here. It is both my passion and my pleasure to walk this path of life optimization by your side, where we'll discuss topics like passion, purpose, intuition, manifestation, physical well-being, and much, much more. I'm a yoga teacher, a meditation and breathwork facilitator, and a national board certified health and wellness coach. But more importantly, I am an eternal optimist, a lover of life, and a forever student. It is my hope that with each and every episode, you too will finally start to believe it really is all magic after all. Ready to dive in? Let's do it. Hello, everyone. Hi. I hope you are doing extremely well this week. I am sending you all of my love and all of my hugs. I have received a few messages from you all recently about the ways in which this podcast is touching your heart and changing your life in some capacity. And to say that that means the world to me is a grave understatement. So for those of you who have reached out or rated and reviewed the podcast, I thank you truly from the bottom of my heart. It means everything to me, and to know that my words are reaching even one person's ears is enough. That's all I ever wanted. So thank you, and I hope you are doing so well. I am really looking forward to the content of today's episode because it will be a combination of some storytelling, as always, as well as me teaching you some practices and techniques that absolutely will change your life. And you can take that to the bank. I am wanting to share with you some of the modalities that I have actually taught for many years that have personally completely transformed and changed my own life, and have also changed the lives of my students, my clients, and honestly, my family and my friends. So before I get into those modalities and the stories, I want to invite you just to take a couple deep breaths with me. So if you have the opportunity to close your eyes, I invite you to do that. If you'd like to place one hand on your heart and one hand on your belly, I also invite you to do that. That's just a great way of connecting to your body, grounding down, and really tuning in, so that you can listen to what's happening on the inside and kind of tune out the outer world for even just a moment. So once you're here, if you have the opportunity, or even if you're walking, I invite you to at least breathe with us. I want us to take deep breaths in through the nose and then just deep exhales out through the mouth. And as you do this, we'll do 3 of these. I want you to imagine that with every in-breath, you're breathing in peace and love and hope. And with every out-breath, you're releasing stress, anxiety, sadness, and heaviness. So when you're ready, breathing in through the nose, filling up all the way, and open mouth, letting it all go. Beautiful. Deeper on the second breath. Inhale through the nose. And open mouth, let it all go. Last one, the deepest yet, filling up the belly, the ribs, the chest. Open mouth, sigh it out. Beautiful. keeping your eyes closed for a moment if you can. And even if you can't, just asking yourself the simple question of how am I doing today? How is my heart? How is my mind? How is my body? And how is my soul, my spirit? Have I been feeding every part of my body? Have I been feeding my mind, feeding my heart, feeding my soul? And if not, or if I haven't enough, how can I feed those things today? What does my heart truly need? What is my mind asking for? What is my spirit craving? So taking just this moment to really ask yourself these questions and to perhaps even find the answers. Knowing that you can grant yourself these things as a simple gift at any point in the day or the week. Whether you need a little walk, a taste of fresh air, some more deep breaths, a hearty meal, a loving phone call, a good cup of coffee. And with that knowing that you can ask yourself how you're doing and what you need, and then grant yourself what you need at any point in any day. Let's take one more deep breath together. So breathing that knowingness in. And exhale, let it go. Beautiful, you guys. You can flutter open your eyelids if you had closed them. You can open your eyes to a world where you can give yourself exactly what you need. Oh, that felt so nice. And that took just a couple of minutes. So whether you were doing that while walking or doing a chore, running an errand, or if you were truly sitting down with me and placing that hand on your heart and hand on your belly, we all just experienced that together. We created a sense of groundedness. We came back home to ourselves. You know, when we rush around, we often lose ourselves, and we truthfully have to numb a little bit, because sometimes in the day-to-day world, when we are rushing and stressing and fitting everything into a day and doing more and more and more and always being productive and achieving, we have to shut down a little bit, quite honestly. You know, our hearts are, I don't think our hearts are meant to take that much. And so when we give ourselves just a single moment of silence, of peace, of breath, we can come back home to ourselves and ask ourselves, how have you been doing? And what do you need? And then give yourself exactly whatever that answer was. So this is a practice that I have used for years and years and years. And I kid you not, every single time I come back to this, just a moment of even these 3 deep breaths that I shared with you, I am amazed. I am naively amazed, as if it's the first time every time, that I feel completely different on the end of those breaths than I did in the beginning. And that I remember who I am again. That might sound silly or just too grand of a statement, but truthfully, when we are rushing around all the time, we can't always stay connected with who we are and what we want and why we're here. You know, oftentimes we're honestly in survival mode, just getting through the day or achieving as much as possible. And I don't necessarily think that's the way it should be or is supposed to be, but it often is the way that it is. And so I'm offering you these breaths as just a practice to get back home to yourself and reground and rediscover your foundation as often as you need to. If you do this every day, that's fantastic. If you do this 10 times a day, that's also fantastic. So take these breaths whenever you can. Ask yourself at least once a day how you're doing and what you need. And with that, we will transition into today's episode. And I purposefully wanted to start with that at the onset of today's episode because a lot of what we will be discussing relates to the practice that we just did. So before I really come clean with these practices and these modalities and these truths that have changed mine and so many other lives, I want to do a little bit of storytelling just to paint a picture for you, share some context about why I'm sharing this now and why I believe that these practices will absolutely transform your life in the same way that they've transformed mine. So for context, I just got back from about 3.5 weeks on the road. When I say on the road, I mean that my husband Cal and I were traveling throughout the Midwest and the South a little bit for 3.5 weeks. We both have some family in Ohio and West Virginia. And so we do this thing where we call it the Midwestern Tour, where we will truly hop between families for anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks. And the reason we do that is anytime we have some sort of event on the East Coast or in the Midwest, it's expensive to fly from California all the way out there. And because we have so much family spread out amongst those states, we always feel like it's the perfect opportunity to spend time with those family members and take advantage of being on that side of the country. But Cal and I also have said that each one of these trips, while full of love and memories and adventures, they also tend to be highly chaotic and ungrounded, and we are moving from house to house, sometimes every 1 day or 2 or 3 days. So it is a lot to handle physically and mentally. And every time we finish one of these trips, we say, oh my gosh, we're not going to do something like that again. It'll have to be different next time. And then when the next time comes around, it's as if we have amnesia and we have completely forgotten that it is so crazy and chaotic. So here we are finally home after 3.5 weeks on the road. We are so thrilled to be home. We miss our family already, but you know that feeling of when you come home from a trip and you finally sleep in your own bed, and it's so comforting. And not just sleeping in your own bed, but the fact that you can open your fridge and you have the food that you eat. You can just reach into the fridge and grab something without worrying if you're grabbing somebody else's leftovers or the spinach they were hoping to have in their salad for lunch. It's just really nice to be in your own space and honestly to come back home to those routines. Is when you're traveling, when you're in some sort of environment that is outside of your norm, we have to adapt and adjust. For me, I love exercising, and in some of these houses, we sometimes didn't have weights available. And so I would be, doing body weight stuff and going on runs, and you just have to kind of change your routines to fit into whatever environment you're in. And so to come home and have my ankle weights for Pilates and my heavy weights for strength training days and our gymnastics rings where we do some kind of TRX work. We'll hang our gymnastics rings over a swing set near our house, and we'll do things like rows and push-ups and all the good stuff. But my point is, it's really nice to come back to those things. And yet I also felt when we came back that I had so much gratitude looking back on these last 3.5 weeks at just how resilient the human body and spirit and mind is. As I mentioned, there were times where we would change location every day. I mean, we would literally, there was one Monday where we woke up in location A. We drove about an hour to work all day in location B, and then we went to sleep in location C, which was about 2 hours away from that one. So in one day, working full time, mind you. So we have these full-time remote corporate tech jobs. We were working full time on the road and trying to go to these events and hang out with our families and see friends that we haven't seen in the area. And so it is really quite impressive to think about how not just us, but any human is able to do something like that. And I had this one moment where I thought about how, we human beings are spread out around the world, obviously. But if you actually take a moment to think about that, some of us live in the desert. Some of us live in the jungle. Some live in mountains. Some live near the beach. We all live in such different environments with different culture and food and language and religion and practices. And we are all the same species. It is quite rare for a species to be able to essentially adapt and thrive in almost any location. For a monkey has to be in the jungle. But for a human being, we can live almost anywhere, and we can truly adapt moment to moment, day to day, based on our environment and just what we have available to us. So that is always just a beautiful thought, to take some moments to have some gratitude for just how freaking strong we are. We are amazing beings, and I don't think we recognize that enough. So that was the context of the trip, that we had 3.5 weeks on the road. We were over in the Midwest because we had a couple events. We had a wedding to attend. We had my mom's Women Warrior Summit, which you may have already heard that podcast episode. And we had just a lot going on, and it was a lot of fun. But as I mentioned, it was also wild in every way possible. And on the flight home a couple days ago, I was asking Cal, what were your highlights of the trip? What were the hard parts? What were the things that you had no idea would end up being highlights for you? And when I was sharing my answer, it became all too clear why my highlights were my highlights. And the reason why I am going to share some of these techniques and practices with you in just a moment is because all of them were connected to my highlights. So I hope that makes sense, but I will share what my highlights were. So the first of my 3 highlights was right after my mom's Women Warrior Summit in Huntington, West Virginia. So if you haven't listened to my episode about that, the Women Warrior Summit was my mom's brainchild that she had about 1.5 years ago, where she decided she wanted to bring powerhouse women together in a huge conference center where they could hear from inspirational keynote speakers and break into breakout sessions and share their ideas and collaborate and just motivate and inspire one another. And so it was truly incredible. The keynote speaker was Nicole Kidman, of course, actress and producer. The entire event was emceed by Soledad O'Brien, who is a really, really incredible and charismatic journalist. And so we had, just some of the most amazing women I've ever met, both on stage and in the conference center as attendees. So it was a wonderful event, but my highlight actually happened after the event. So my whole family came back to my parents' house where we were going to have this kind of taco salad bar. And we had family that had flown in for the event. We had, Cal, my husband's mom from Ohio. So we had a bunch of people there, all family, except that there was one family friend there as well. And I had never met her before, but I had heard a lot about her because she is someone that my dad had worked with in previous jobs and had known for many, many years and had always just, would sing her praises. And she came to this event because she had actually been connected to my mom's twin sister, who had essentially the same breast cancer diagnosis as this woman. Now, both of these women that I'm speaking about, so my aunt, which is my mom's twin sister, and this other woman, I'm not going to share her name, but let's just call her Chloe. So Chloe and my aunt had the same breast cancer diagnosis, the same type of breast cancer, and my aunt had gone through it before Chloe had. And so when Chloe was diagnosed, I believe my mom had connected the two women, and they really just walked through that journey together because Chloe didn't know anyone else who had had that specific diagnosis, and she felt very alone, and she was struggling mentally and physically. And so they had been connected, and it had been exactly what she needed. My aunt was like an angel in her path. And so this woman, Chloe, is at the dinner table with us, and she's sitting right across from me. And she just starts kind of opening up about her story a little bit. And in her story, you know, she's sharing that she never expected the aftermath of her diagnosis to be so difficult. You know, she's now in remission. I believe she's still maybe going through a couple surgeries and things like that. But mentally, she's not the same woman as she was before. And she was sharing very, very vulnerably that she hasn't really slept in over a year. I mean, she just feels unsafe in her body. She's afraid of her body. She doesn't know if or when it will turn on her again. And so she just has this deep-seated lack of trust in herself and just a lot of fear. And so as she's sharing this, of course, I'm kind of perking up as I'm hearing, because in her words, all I can hear in my own head is, I have the solution. You know, I have something that could work for you. I think I might have one of your answers. And so I shared that with her. I said, Chloe, I think I know something that could really, really help you. And I said it could help you sleep. It could help you with the anxiety. It could help you with the fear. She shared that she had a lot of PTSD just around all of her treatments and her diagnosis itself. And I said, I have read studies about this particular thing helping with PTSD as well. And I'd love to share it with you. And so I start teaching her a little bit about breathwork, which is the modality that I think has truly changed my life more than any other, I might venture to say, because breathwork is the quickest way to get into your own nervous system and regulate your body, mind, and spirit, truly. I mean, when you do breathwork, so what's really fascinating about breathwork, which, by the way, I'll just mention, if you've never heard of breathwork before, fear not, I will break it down in this episode. But what I wanted to share here is that breathwork is the only involuntary physiological function in your entire body that you can voluntarily change. And because you can voluntarily change this involuntary function, there is this cascade of involuntary effects afterwards that completely transform your body and your physiology. So for example, some of the other physiological functions in your body that are involuntary are things like pH of your blood, digestion, sexual function, mood, blood pressure, heart rate, dilation of your pupils. All of these things are involuntary functions that completely create the quality of our life. If your digestion isn't good, you're not going to feel good. If you don't feel good, you're not going to want to, embark on adventures and follow your purpose. You're going to want to stay in bed or stay seated on the couch. So all of these physiological functions that are involuntary, that have this profound impact on our lives, you can alter and tweak every single one of them using the power of the breath. So there are so many powerful techniques, different breathing patterns that you can utilize for any time of day, for any part of the human life cycle. So whether you are pregnant or postpartum, or you're a young child or you're an old man, It doesn't matter. There are practices for everyone. There are beginner-friendly practices. There are advanced practices. There are practices that will energize you if you're feeling really lethargic and heavy or sad. There are practices that will calm you if you're feeling anxious and stressed and rushed. There are practices that will help clear your sinuses and boost your immune system. There are practices for everything you could ever want. And so when I was getting certified in breathwork, I remember my teacher said that when you take a moment to ask yourself every morning how you're doing and what you need, you can then mix the proper breath cocktail for yourself to give you what you need. So if you're feeling anxious and stressed and rushed and just overwhelmed, you might mix a little breath cocktail, so to speak, that will calm and regulate your nervous system. So I could go on and on about this, and I'll share much more about breathwork at the end, but for now, I want to stick to the highlights. So I begin teaching Chloe about the power of breathwork because she was saying that not only had she not been able to sleep in over a year, but she said, I would really love to learn how to meditate because I cannot turn my mind off. And I said, oh, that is too relatable. And I said, if you have tried meditation and it hasn't worked for you before, or it just felt like you couldn't turn your mind off and you kind of gave up and thought meditation's for someone else, that's not for me, I know the reason why. And I know what will change your meditation practice forever. And I said, breathwork will do that. Because breathwork, as I just shared, is the way to switch your mind and body into a different system, a different baseline than you were just in. So if you think back to the beginning of this episode, when you turned on the episode, you may have been feeling a certain way. And then after those 3 deep breaths with a hand on your heart and a hand on your belly and asking yourself a few questions, you probably felt very different. And I know I did. And I feel that all the time, every single time I practice breath work or share it with someone. And so when you are trying to meditate and you have just had a very full, packed, perhaps stressful day, of course you won't be able to turn off your brain. First of all, we don't ever want to turn off our minds or turn off our brains. Our brains are created to think. That is why we have our brains. So the point is not to turn off your brain. The point is to be able to slow your thoughts, perhaps find some more space between your thoughts, and to just accept them and not dive into each thought and have to kind of play out that entire loop or story. Just seeing your thoughts, letting them go, staying seated, staying connected to your breath. And when you practice breath work after that very stressful day, for example, you are actually turning off a switch, if you will. So you're turning off the switch of stress and anxiety and overwhelm and rush and productivity. And you are triggering something in your body that says, I'm safe, I'm okay, and I can slow down now. And so I find for me personally, if I try to sit in meditation and I haven't practiced any breath work first, I'm in the same boat as you all. For any of you who have felt like you tried meditation and it just didn't work, or you couldn't turn off your brain or whatever it might be, I have been there and I still am there unless I practice breath work. And so I was sharing these practices with her and, she was then perking up, feeling like, wow, this might be the answer I've been looking for. And we got deep, deep into conversation. I ended up sharing far more than breath work with her. I was talking to her about past lives and mediumship and all sorts of incredible spiritual things that have really kept me grounded and inspired in my life. And she loved every single one. And so at the very end, I said, hey, Chloe, before we, drop you back off at your hotel, would you like me to teach you a little bit of breath work so that you can sleep tonight? And she said, oh my goodness, would you really? And I swear her face turned into one of those emojis with the heart eyes. Like she was instantly in love. She couldn't believe that I was offering to teach her breathwork, right there for free in the moment. And I said, absolutely. I would love nothing more than to share this with you. And so we walked into another room. We sat down on the floor, sat cross-legged, took off our shoes. And I first just explained a couple basic frameworks of breath work, what it is, how it works, what it does in the body, what it does in the mind. And she was, glued to my every word. She could not wait to learn more and to practice it. So after I shared the foundation with her, I taught her a very, very simple breathing technique called equal ratio breath, or sometimes it's called box breathing. And the way this works, if you yourself would like to practice, is you breathe in and out of your nose, but you choose a number somewhere usually between 3 and 10. For a beginner or someone slightly more advanced, I would start with 5 just to be safe. You'll breathe in through your nose for a count of 5, hold your breath at the top for a count of 5, exhale through your nose for a count of 5, hold your breath at the bottom for a count of 5. So this technique is actually taught in basic training for U.S. Navy SEALs because it is an incredibly quick and efficient way to calm your nervous system, regulate your body, and bring yourself back to center when you are feeling all over the place. So for U.S. Navy SEALs, when they're in a high stress situation and they need to focus and somewhat clear their mind and just come back to, they are taught to use equal ratio breath. So it's a very simple technique. If you have insomnia late at night, I recommend doing even just 10 rounds of this. So one round would be an inhale, a hold, an exhale, and a hold. You can do whatever feels good in your body at any given point, but it's really, really exceptional for so many things. And it's safe to do morning, day, night. If you're pregnant, if you're postpartum, if you're a child, if you're elderly, it doesn't matter. This is safe and beneficial for everyone. So I started with this technique just to kind of get her foot in the door, so to speak. And I guided her through this practice. I guided her through a short meditation at the end. And when I instructed her to flutter open her eyelids, she had tears in her eyes. And I said, "How was that for you, Chloe?" And she started crying more. And she said, "Devin, I have not exhaled in over a year." And that went straight to my heart because it shows how symbolic our breath is. Our breath is not just something we do to stay alive, and sometimes you breathe fast, sometimes you breathe slow. No. There's a rhyme and a reason and a meaning behind every breathing pattern all day, all night for your entire life. If you think about when you're stressed and you start breathing really, really sharp and fast and shallow into your chest. Sometimes you're breathing in and out of your mouth, almost hyperventilating. If you compare that to a young baby sleeping in their crib, they're breathing in and out of their nose, and you can picture their belly rising and falling, almost like a little baby Buddha. And this is so symbolic of how those two people in that analogy are doing. The baby is feeling safe and at peace and relaxed. And the other person that's taking those shallow breaths is feeling like they're in survival mode, like they're not safe. And so there's so much meaning behind our breath. And when she shared that she had not exhaled in over a year, that's because she had been holding on to so much. She was holding on to the fear and the stress and the PTSD and the anxiety and the insomnia. And she was afraid to let it go, because what happens when you exhale and you surrender and you let go of something you've been holding? Sometimes you realize how much you've been holding and you just can't get back up again, or at least that's the fear. And so when she shared this, I let her cry, and I was there for her, and I comforted her, but I also just let her share her truth. And I asked her questions, and it was just so, so deeply healing for her, but also for me. Not necessarily healing for me, but it was so powerful because in that moment, and I know we've all had these moments before, I knew this is why I'm on this earth. if that moment sitting there on the ground with Chloe, teaching her a breathing exercise that allowed her to exhale for the first time in a year, was all I ever do in my life, I feel like I have fulfilled a large part of my purpose. Now, granted, I want to do that with thousands and millions more people. I want to share truth and honesty and optimism and love and light and peace with people. But to sit down on the ground with another human being, truthfully with a stranger, someone I had never met before, and to breathe with her in perfect unison and harmony, and to hear her cry and say, I have not released in a year. Thank you. I was on cloud nine. I was so grateful for that opportunity. And so later that night, when my family was dropping her off, she said, hey, I would really love to hire you to be my personal breathwork teacher and spiritual guide. And I said, I would absolutely love to. Count me in. And I told her, Chloe, I know you've said thank you countless times this evening, but I want you to know that if you feel that I'm an angel in your path, I also feel like you're an angel in mine, because getting to do what we did tonight and now having this new opportunity where I'll get to share this more with you is truly all I ever wanted in my life. And I feel that I can be of service with something that I love, something I'm passionate about, something that I know and have studied, and something that I know is so, so potent and life-changing and transformational. And so, we hugged at the end of the night, and she had, tears in her eyes and the heart-eyed emoji again. And I probably looked exactly the same. And the rest of that night, my family was kind of walking around downtown a little bit, and I was quiet because I was so, so at peace. And granted, because I'm a talker, there are times when I'm at peace and I'm still talking a lot. But in that moment, I can't even explain it. I wish I had words for it, but I just felt so full of purpose and fulfillment and service and love and serenity. And it was absolutely a highlight for me. So even though that day at the summit had been mind-blowing and inspirational, I felt like in that moment, sitting on the ground with Chloe, that was my chance to share my messages with her. And I feel like that's the reason why all of us are here. We all have messages to share and things that we want to create and bring to the world. And I truly believe that we all deserve the opportunity and chance to share those things. I think if there's something that is blocking you right now from sharing those things, whether it is fear or a job that drains you and takes away your life force and your creativity, and you feel that there's nothing outside of that passionless job that you would even be able to share right now, I want you to figure out ways to take away those blockers, take away those obstacles. And granted, there are times in our lives when we might not be able to. And I understand that. I myself have been there. And there are times where we might not need to. Sometimes we need that safety or just that fear, just being in a comfort zone. But if you are listening right now and you hear that calling to share something you're passionate about, or to create something, to produce something, to innovate in some way, to serve the world, and you are ready to do that, no matter how scared you might be, I want you to do it, and I want you to do it scared. So that is my message for you, just based on this evening that I had with Chloe. So that was highlight number 1. Highlight number 2 was not all that different. So when we were on this trip, that is when the conflict between Israel and Palestine, or Israel and Hamas, broke out in the Middle East. And of course, there was a lot of deeply rooted sadness and fear and distrust and just anxiety around the whole situation. Everyone we spoke to was on one side of the coin, and they had strong opinions in one way or another. And it was, a lot to walk through. times of war and conflict in the world impact us all on an energetic level, on a psychic level, on a spiritual level. And so when the war broke out and I found myself at a really low point with work, I was having an extremely difficult week where I had far too much piled on my plate. I was overwhelmed. Quite honestly, I had some days where I would break out into tears, not even trying to, but I would just be sitting there at my computer working and tears would flow down my face. And I realized one evening, this is not happening in a microcosm. This is impacted by what is happening on the other side of the world. And so I share about this conflict just because this led to my second highlight. It had nothing to do with the conflict. I'll say that right now. But our second Friday night, Cal and I were staying with some fantastic friends of ours that we met in college at Ohio State. And they are the rabbi and rabbi's wife, which is known as the Rebbitzin of the Ohio State Chabad House, which is a Jewish organization that opens their doors to Jewish and non-Jewish students. They offer fantastic food and classes and community events. And so Cal and I had spent some years going there when we were in college at Ohio State. And so all these years later, we were revisiting and we were staying in the rabbi and the Rebbitzin's home for Friday night. And if you don't know, in the Jewish faith, there is something called Shabbat, which is the Sabbath that is held from Friday sundown until Saturday sundown. And during the Sabbath, during Shabbat, you eat a lot of great food. You spend a lot of time together. You spend hours reading, praying, doing everything that feeds your soul, and you don't use any technology. So, traditional religious Jews will not drive their cars. They will not use their phones. They will not turn on the TV. And granted, within Judaism, there is a wide range and spectrum of how observant or religious any particular Jew is. And so Cal and I were going to spend a Sabbath, a Shabbat, at their house, and we were going to follow all of their same rules. So it was a really beautiful 25-hour period of napping and reading and talking and eating and just getting some truly the only moment of rest on the trip. But that Friday night, Cal and I got to their home. And usually for a Friday night Shabbat dinner, Jews will open their home to anyone that wants to come. So there are non-Jews there, there are Jews there. At this particular Shabbat dinner, there were students, there were alumni of Ohio State, there were neighbors. And so it was a huge dinner. And as people were filing in, quite a few of the Jewish students were going over to the rabbi and his wife and sharing just how scared and sad they were about the conflict and that they felt unsafe just even leaving their apartments at Ohio State because they're Jewish and they were just afraid of anti-Semitism. And as they're sharing all of this, I had kind of just blurted out. I said, Sarah, who is the rabbi's wife, I said, Sarah, if it would be helpful, I would be more than happy to guide everyone through a breathing practice at some point during our dinner tonight. And she said, oh my goodness, let's do it. Amazing. So we were planning on doing it for later in the evening, but as more and more people filed in and we were sitting on the couches, waiting for us all to get started with dinner, the amount of fear and just a deep-rooted anxiety and sadness that I could hear in these students' voices, I said to Sarah, hey, Sarah, actually, I think this would be a great time before we get started with dinner. Do you mind if I guide everyone through some breathing exercises? And everyone, I kid you not just Sarah, but all of the students and the alumni, everyone flooded into the room and they said, yes, please. And so I sat everyone down on the couches. We were just sitting in a circle, some were on the floor, and I did very similar what I did with Chloe. I taught them some of the basics, the foundations, and then I guided them through a short practice. And on the other side of the breathing practice, you could tell there was a different energy in the room. People felt just more serene and at peace and safe. And so that was a beautiful, beautiful gift. And a couple days later, Sarah asked me, she said, I know this is last minute, but tomorrow, Monday, I know that you're working full time, working all day, but do you mind maybe offering some sort of breathwork event or workshop at the Chabad house after you work? And instantly, even though I knew I would be potentially overwhelmed and very busy with work and maybe a little stressed when it came down to Monday, I said, absolutely. I would love nothing more. And so Monday comes around. As predicted, I had this crazy day at work, but the second work ended, I walked over to the Chabad house. I took a few deep breaths in the kitchen before I went out into the living room space, which is where the events are. And I walked out, and there were just 4 female students there, and Cal was there and Sarah was there. So it was a very small group. We were sitting in a circle, and I got to lead my favorite thing. And again, I taught them the foundations. I guided them through a practice. And this one was even more powerful because I was able to guide a slightly longer practice, whereas Friday night, I didn't want to take too much time away from the dinner. And so after guiding what was probably just a 10-minute practice, which does not take a lot of time, you guys, we all could find 10 minutes in our day. When I guided everyone to flutter open their eyelids, the eyes I saw staring back at me were not the same eyes that I had seen staring back at me 10 minutes before. Again, I saw this sense of everything's okay, and suddenly I'm sleepy because I didn't even realize I was sleepy before, and now I'm aware of how I'm feeling. And I went over to speak to the rabbi and Rebbitzin's daughter, Batya, who is just a gem. And she asked me a fantastic question. She said, Devin, the thing I'm struggling with when it comes to breath work is what happens when you do a practice like the one we just did, and afterwards you realize that putting down what you've been carrying is such a relief and you don't want to pick it up anymore. And I said, that's such a great question. And we just sat with that together and kind of talked back and forth about what it means to be holding and carrying too much, and that these practices are incredible for us, not only because they regulate our nervous system and create that cascade of events and effects in our body, but because it shows us how much we've been holding. And maybe in those moments, we can reassess, how much can I truly hold? What is sustainable for me to carry? Because she was sharing that she realized she was holding too much. And suddenly when she got to put down that load, she realized that she was exhausted. And that happens to us all the time. And that's not the first time I've heard that either. You know, I feel that very frequently when I do these practices. It really does feel like a coming home to myself. Like, oh, there you are. Hi, Dev. How are you doing? And I feel like I come home to my 4-year-old self, because all of us still have that inner child within us, you know, that small version of yourself that is still just optimistic and hopeful, and you want to play and you want to rest and you want to eat yummy food and you want to do the things that light you up. You know, I still want to dance and sing and act and make brownies and, you know, watch Scooby-Doo on the weekends. And that inner child exists in all of us. And so just taking a moment to tune in and say, hey, honey, how's it going? You know, there are times when I do that and it almost makes me cry, because I know maybe I haven't been treating my inner child so nicely, or I've been pushing her too hard. And at the end of the day, I'm still that 4-year-old girl. And so that's what came to mind when Batya was saying, I realized I've been holding so much and I'm so tired. So allow that to be your reminder to check in with your inner self, to check in with how much you've been carrying, and see what is realistic for you to hold. And maybe what are some things that you can take off your plate or release from that burden that you're carrying. So that was highlight number 2, getting to share breathwork in those 2 situations. And then the last one, which is very simple and very similar to these, you will probably guess what I was doing. But in one of those weeks when we were on the road, as I mentioned earlier, I had a really tough time at work. Everyone on my team was simply overwhelmed. We were stressed to the max. We had a team meeting where everyone was honestly in tears. I think if we had been our inner children on the outside that day, we all would have just been crying. And so at the end of the week on that Friday, when I was exhausted, I was about to lead myself through some breathing practices, and I thought, no. I have to share this with my team, and not just my small team, but my broader team. I thought they might think I'm crazy and woo-woo for just dropping in here with a random video of me breathing and guiding them through a meditation. But I did it, and they loved it. The response was so warm and positive. The thing that I hear most often when I guide breathwork is, that's exactly what I needed, and I didn't even know I needed it. Thank you. And so I heard that from some of my managers, from my teammates, and that was another highlight. I mean, that truly took me 5 minutes to record that video, and just being able to share these practices with people that really need them. And let's be honest, we all need them all the time. That is a huge part of my purpose. And breathwork is just one of the modalities that I love to share and teach and use, but it is by far one of the most powerful practices I have ever come across. So I have now shared the highlights with you and just why they were so impactful for me. I've shared a little bit of the foundation of breathwork, but I do want to share with you perhaps one more just quick nugget of wisdom. So when we think about breathwork, or when I think about breathwork, I think of this really intricate chicken and egg situation. So of course, the chicken and egg situation, if you don't know what I'm talking about, is the question of, so which came first, the chicken or the egg? And that is the exact same question we can ask ourselves with breathing patterns and our emotions. So first of all, the word emotion, I've mentioned this in past episodes, but the word emotion actually comes from a Latin root, emotere, which means energy in motion. And so when you think about your breath and how your breath can actually move energy in your body, your breathing practices actually do move your energy up and down your spine, back and forth. And that breath, that energy actually moves in the same kind of system or cycle as our cerebrospinal fluid, as it's moving up and down our spine into our brain and back down. So if we can use breath work to move energy, and our emotions are just energy in motion, then that means that by changing our breath, we can change how we feel. Because we know that the way that we're breathing is often inherently linked to how we're feeling. So as I mentioned before, when we're feeling stressed and anxious and overwhelmed, we're taking those short, shallow breaths in and out of the chest. But when you think about that rested, peaceful baby who's sleeping in their crib, they're taking those deep, restful breaths in and out of the nose. And so if we know that our breath is often a reflection of our emotions, we also know that our emotions are a reflection of our breath. And so you can remember that the next time you're feeling a certain uncomfortable emotion that you need to move through and process, you can change your breath to change your emotion. And when you learn to change your breath to change your emotion, and we know that our emotions are what cause us to engage in certain habits and what essentially then builds our day and builds our life based on those behaviors and habits, then we go back to the beginning of that cycle and we realize that when we change our breath, we change our life. So let that sit in for a moment. Just remember that, again, our emotions are a reflection of our breath in the same way that our breath is a reflection of our emotions. And so if you change one, you change the other. So with that, I will close out for today. I am sure I will be sharing plenty more breath work with you, as well as other practices and modalities that I use every single day in my own life and with my students and clients. But if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, wherever you personally like to listen to podcasts. And if you haven't followed or subscribed to my YouTube channel yet, please do that as well so that you never miss another podcast episode. And with that, my friends, I will sign off. I cannot wait to see you next week. And I'm wishing you all the best, most peaceful, most serene of weeks ever. Okay, bye everyone. See you soon.